Tonight, a thick fog covers the small town. Only dim yellow lights glow faintly from silent houses. Ethan, a college senior, receives a strange message. If you want to know the truth about your family, come to the abandoned house on Misty Hill. At midnight. His heart races, for that house has long been rumored to be haunted. Locals whisper that anyone who steps inside never comes out the same. Ethan hesitates, but curiosity and the dark secrets about his family push him to go. The Misty Hill looms ahead, dead trees stretching like twisted claws across the path. The rusty iron gate creaks open, as if someone has been waiting for Ethan all along. In the darkness, Ethan turns on his flashlight, its weak beam cutting across cracked, mouldy walls. A dusty old portrait hangs crooked on the wall, and terrifyingly, the painted eyes seem to follow his every step. Cold wind whistles through the cracks, echoing faint whispers. Turn back. I turn back. Suddenly, footsteps drag slowly across the rotten, wooden floor, yet his flashlight reveals no one. He steadies his breath and ventures deeper, until he stops at a locked bedroom door. Through the gap in the door, a pale, skeletal hand suddenly reaches out, as if inviting Ethan inside. He stumbles back, trembling, but the door creaks open on its own. Groaning slowly, inside the room is empty, except for a wooden box placed neatly in the center. Ethan steps closer, opens the lid. Inside is an old photo of his parents, but with a strange, distorted face standing beside them. Before Ethan can react, the ceiling light flickers on, and behind him, a chilling voice whispers, "You've finally come, at last." Ethan spins around, only to see a tall, thin figure, its face blurred in the white mist, slowly moving towards him. Ethan stood frozen in the middle of the hallway, his heart pounding in rhythm with the relentless knocking. The sound was not frantic, not rushed. It was slow, deliberate, as though whoever, or whatever, was behind the door already knew he was listening. He swallowed hard, gripping the wooden banister of the staircase, his knuckles turning white. For a moment he considered calling out, asking who was there, but his throat tightened and no words came. The silence of the house seemed to lean in, waiting for his decision. When he finally gathered the courage, Ethan moved slowly toward the front door. Each step on the creaking floorboards echoed far louder than he intended, amplifying the suffocating tension. The knocking stopped as abruptly as it began. He stood in front of the door now, staring at the old brass handle. His mind raced. Was it a neighbor, an animal, or something far worse? He reached out, fingertips brushing the cold metal. And for an instant, the air felt heavier, thicker, like the entire house was holding its breath alongside him. He pulled the door open with a shaky hand. There was nothing, just the night, dark, endless, and quiet. The porch stretched out before him, moonlight bathing the cracked wood in pale silver. No footprints, no shadows, no sign of anyone at all. Ethan stepped outside, his eyes darting across the empty yard. The tall grass swayed gently in the midnight wind, whispering against itself like 1,000 hidden voices. He turned his head, scanning the tree line. But all he could see was the stillness of the woods, looming like a wall around his home. A chill rolled down his spine. As he turned back toward the house, he noticed something etched into the wood of the doorframe, a deep, jagged mark, like a symbol carved with deliberate precision. It hadn't been there earlier that evening. The lines were sharp and uneven, almost like claws had scraped it in, yet it formed a clear shape, a circle broken at the top, with what looked like 3 descending lines beneath it. He didn't recognize the symbol, but as his eyes lingered, an odd pressure built at the base of his skull, and he instinctively looked away. Ethan closed the door quickly, bolting it shut. His chest rose and fell heavily as he leaned against it, trying to steady his breath. The house was silent again, but silence no longer felt like peace. It felt oppressive. He made his way to the living room. The flickering light of an old lamp painting long shadows across the walls. As he sat down on the worn couch, he pulled out his phone, scrolling for any clue of the symbol he had just seen. His signal was weak, the screen loading slowly, and then, before he could type, his phone vibrated with a notification. The message came from an unknown number. "Do not open the door again." That was it. No name, no context. Just those 6 chilling words. Ethan's stomach dropped, his mind scrambling for answers. Was someone watching him? Was this a prank? He stood abruptly, turning toward the nearest window, pulling back the curtain. Darkness. Only his own reflection stared back. But as his eyes adjusted, he noticed something faintly different. His reflection wasn't moving in sync. Its head tilted just a fraction slower than his, and its lips curved into the faintest, impossible smile. He staggered backward, nearly tripping over the edge of the rug. Panic clawed at his chest, but when he glanced back again, the reflection was normal, mirroring him perfectly. He rubbed his eyes, shaking his head. "I'm exhausted," he thought. "I'm just seeing things." But deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. This house wasn't just old, it was alive. And it was watching. Somewhere in its walls, in its shadows, it was aware of him. The text message replayed in his mind like a warning he couldn't escape. "Do not open the door again." As the night stretched on, Ethan tried to force himself to sleep, but the house resisted his attempts. The creaks above his bedroom ceiling grew heavier, as though footsteps were pacing just out of reach. At one point he heard a whisper, his own name, spoken softly, almost lovingly, just outside his door. He pulled the covers tighter around himself, heart hammering against his ribs. He didn't move, didn't breathe, until the whisper faded into silence. When he finally drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep, he dreamed of the carved symbol glowing faintly in the dark, like a warning burned into his memory. Ethan awoke at dawn, exhausted but relieved to see the pale light of morning seeping through his curtains. For a moment he convinced himself it had all been a nightmare. But as he walked downstairs, the truth shattered that fragile hope. The front door was wide open, and on the floorboards of the porch, carved into the wood as though by invisible hands, was a fresh message scratched beneath the original symbol. The letters were jagged, uneven, but unmistakable. They read, "You let it in." Ethan stood motionless at the threshold, the cool morning air brushing against his face. His eyes locked onto the fresh carving on the porch. "You let it in." The words felt heavier than wood, as though they were carved directly into his chest. His breath caught in his throat. He hadn't opened the door last night, not willingly. Yet here it was, wide open, as if the house itself had betrayed him. He stepped closer, crouching low to trace the grooves of the letters with trembling fingers. The cuts were fresh, sharp, almost wet, as though whatever had written them had only just left. Ethan pulled his hand back, his fingertips tingling with unease. He turned quickly, scanning the yard, the tree line, the street beyond. Nothing. The world outside seemed too quiet, unnaturally still, as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. Retreating inside, he locked the door firmly, sliding every bolt, fastening every chain. But deep down, he already knew locks wouldn't matter anymore. Whatever the message referred to, whatever he had let in, was no longer outside. It was here, somewhere within these walls, and no barrier could keep him safe from it. Hours crawled by in a haze of paranoia. Every shadow stretched longer than it should. Every sound echoed too loudly. Ethan tried to distract himself, making coffee, flipping through the old books stacked on the shelves, but the gnawing dread clung to him. Like a second skin, he sat at the kitchen table, staring at the black liquid in his mug, when a faint sound broke the silence. It was rhythmic, hollow, almost like breathing. Not his own, not human, but deeper, wetter, as though something enormous was inhaling and exhaling just beneath the floorboards. The sound persisted, vibrating through the wood beneath his feet. Ethan's pulse quickened. He crouched down, pressing his ear against the kitchen floor. The sound grew clearer, slow, deliberate breaths rising from below the house. His stomach turned. There was no basement, no crawl space he knew of. Yet something was moving under there, something alive. He scrambled back, his chair scraping loudly across the tiles. The breathing stopped, and in that sudden silence he heard a single word, whispered directly into his ear though no one stood near him. "Ethan." He spun around, his back colliding with the counter. The kitchen was empty, still, as if nothing had ever happened. But his body told him otherwise. His skin prickled. His veins thrummed with adrenaline. Shaking, he backed out of the kitchen and stumbled into the living room. That was when he saw it, the symbol again. It had been carved into the wall above the fireplace, identical to the one on the doorframe, the circle broken at the top, the 3 descending lines. But this time, the lines dripped as though wet with fresh ink or blood. Ethan staggered closer, the metallic scent of iron filling his nose. His mind screamed at him to look away, but his eyes refused to break free. The longer he stared, the more the symbol seemed to shift, its lines writhing, reshaping into new forms that his brain couldn't fully comprehend. And then faintly, beneath the scratching lines, voices began to emerge, whispering, layered, overlapping, dozens, no hundreds of voices murmuring at once, all speaking in a language he didn't recognize. He clamped his hands over his ears, but the sound was inside his skull now, burrowing deeper, rooting itself like a parasite. With a sudden jolt of clarity, Ethan stumbled backward and knocked over the lamp. The light flickered out, plunging the room into dimness. His chest heaved, his throat raw as though he'd been screaming, though no sound had left his lips. And then he heard it, a noise from upstairs, slow, dragging footsteps, heavy and deliberate, moving across the wooden floor above his head. But Ethan knew one thing for certain. He was alone in this house. He had been alone since he moved in. His legs shook, but he forced himself toward the staircase, each step echoing louder than the last. Halfway up the stairs, Ethan froze. The footsteps above had stopped. The silence was worse than the sound. He reached the landing, sweat trickling down his back, and turned toward the hallway. The doors to the upstairs rooms were all closed, except one, his bedroom door. It stood slightly ajar, a faint glow seeping out from within. Not the warm glow of sunlight or a lamp, but a sickly pulsating light, like the slow beat of a dying heart. Ethan swallowed hard, inching closer, his hand trembling as he pushed the door open wider. The room was empty. No intruder, no creature, no explanation. But on the bed, his bed, lay his phone. The screen was lit, a new message glowing brightly. It was from the same unknown number as before. The words were simple, chilling, and final. You are not alone in this house. As Ethan stared at the message, his reflection in the mirror across the room began to move again. Only this time, it didn't stop. It stepped forward, out of the glass. Ethan's breath hitched as his reflection stepped out of the mirror, its movements smooth yet disturbingly unnatural. The figure looked exactly like him. Same hair, same clothes, same trembling hands, but its smile was wrong. Too wide, too knowing. Ethan stumbled backward, his legs nearly giving out beneath him. The room felt heavier, the air pressing against his chest like a weight. For a moment, he thought he was losing his mind. But then his double spoke, its voice identical to his own, yet hollow, distorted, as though coming from a tunnel. You should never have opened the door. The words froze Ethan in place. His mind flashed back to the carvings, to the sound beneath the floorboards, to the whisper calling his name. Every sign had led to this moment. He backed against the wall, clutching the nightstand for support, but his twin only tilted its head, studying him like prey. Slowly it took a step closer. The floor creaked under its weight, solid, real. Not a trick of the light. Ethan's voice cracked as he forced out a whisper. What are you? The twin smiled wider, its teeth too sharp now, too many, gleaming in the pulsing sickly glow. The thing didn't answer. Instead, it lunged forward suddenly, faster than Ethan expected. He flung himself sideways, colliding with the dresser, sending objects clattering to the floor. The mirror twin's hand missed his arm by inches, but the air burned cold where it passed, leaving gooseflesh in its wake. Ethan scrambled to his feet, his heart hammering violently, and sprinted down the hallway. Behind him, the sound of footsteps followed, perfectly synchronized with his own. Like an echo he couldn't outrun, he burst down the stairs 2 at a time, gripping the railing until his knuckles turned white. At the bottom of the stairs, Ethan turned sharply into the living room, his chest heaving, his mind spinning with panic. He pressed his back against the wall, listening. Silence. Had it stopped? For a moment, he thought maybe it hadn't followed him. Maybe it was still upstairs. But then he saw movement. In the darkened window across the room, his reflection stared back at him again. Not in the glass of the mirror upstairs, but in the pane of the window itself. And this reflection was smiling. Slowly, deliberately, it lifted a hand and pointed behind him. Ethan whipped around. The living room was empty. Nothing stood behind him. No figure, no twin. Yet when he turned back, the reflection remained, pointing, grinning. Its eyes black voids now, empty and endless. He stumbled away, tripping over the coffee table, his body crashing to the floor. The house groaned around him, the walls creaking, the floorboards rattling, as though something immense pressed against them from beneath. It felt as though the entire house were breathing again. Inhale, exhale, slow and heavy. And within that rhythm, Ethan heard the whispers return, chanting his name over and over. Clutching the table to pull himself up, Ethan's eyes darted to the front door. Without hesitation, he rushed to it, fumbling at the locks. His fingers slipped, slick with sweat, but finally the bolts slid free. He yanked the door open wide, desperate for the cool night air outside. But what waited on the other side made his blood run cold. The porch, the street, the trees, everything was gone. Instead, there was only blackness. A vast, endless void stretching out in every direction. And from that darkness, pale hands began to emerge, dozens of them, reaching, clawing toward him. Ethan slammed the door shut, stumbling backward into the center of the room. His chest heaved, his body trembling uncontrollably. He turned, desperate for another way out, when he saw his twin again. It was standing by the fireplace now, calm, patient, smiling. In its hand, it held Ethan's phone. The screen lit up with a single message. "Stop running. You're already inside." As Ethan's eyes widened in horror, the twin raised its free hand, and the lights in the entire house flickered out, plunging everything into complete darkness. Darkness swallowed the room as the lights died, leaving Ethan in a silence so heavy it pressed against his ears. His chest heaved, heart pounding like a drum that threatened to tear itself free. He held his breath, straining to hear movement, but the house was unnervingly still. Then, a faint glow appeared across the room. The phone, still in the hand of his reflection. The screen flickered, words typing themselves across the display, as if an unseen hand controlled it. Sit. Listen. Remember. Ethan's knees weakened, his body nearly buckling under the command. It didn't feel like a suggestion. It felt like an order. The glow from the phone dimmed, and suddenly, the air shifted. Ethan felt as though the walls around him weren't solid anymore. He blinked, and the room transformed. The living room melted away, its furniture dissolving like mist, revealing a different space, an older version of the house. The wallpaper was torn and stained, the furniture cracked with age, the air reeking of mildew and rot. Ethan staggered, panic rising as he realized he wasn't standing in his home anymore. He was standing in the house's memory. He turned slowly, and there in the corner sat a figure in a rocking chair. The chair creaked as it moved, back and forth, though the figure inside seemed frozen in place. An old woman, her face shadowed, her hands clasped tightly around something Ethan couldn't see. Her lips trembled as she whispered words he couldn't understand, a language old and broken. Ethan stepped closer, compelled against his will. The woman's head turned sharply toward him, her eyes wide, milky white and empty. Her voice rose into a rasping scream. "He remembers you!" The force of it shook the walls, rattling the floorboards beneath Ethan's feet. The air grew icy cold, stabbing into his skin like needles. Ethan stumbled back, covering his ears. But the woman's scream didn't come from her mouth anymore. It came from everywhere, the walls, the floor, the ceiling, even from inside his own head. He pressed his palms tighter, but it only grew louder until suddenly, silence. When he dared to open his eyes, the woman was gone. The chair was empty, rocking slowly on its own, and then behind him came a whisper. "Do you know why the house keeps you here?" Ethan spun around, but there was no one, only shadows that stretched too long, bending across the walls like living things. The shadows moved, crawling up the walls, converging toward a single point above the fireplace. There, a dark shape began to form, Something massive, skeletal, and twisted. A presence, not just seen but felt. Ethan's lungs constricted, his chest aching as he struggled for breath. The thing's voice seeped into his mind, heavy and cold. You are not the first. You are not the last. The house feeds and it remembers. Images flashed across Ethan's vision. Faces he didn't know, screaming, clawing at walls, swallowed by darkness. Victims, countless before him, trapped within the house's memory. Just as he was now, Ethan fell to his knees, clutching his head as the visions overwhelmed him. He saw a family sitting around a dinner table in this very room, their faces melting into hollow skulls as black liquid dripped from their eyes. He saw children playing upstairs, their laughter turning into screams as their bodies flickered like broken film, erased from existence. The images seared into his mind, impossible to look away from. And then he saw himself, standing in the same room, in the same moment, except his twin was behind him, whispering something into his ear. Ethan's stomach dropped. The reflection hadn't been hunting him. It had been guiding him here. The visions snapped away, and Ethan was back in the living room. The lights flickered on, buzzing weakly, as though nothing had changed. But across the room, standing in front of the mirror above the fireplace, was his twin once again. Its smile was calm, almost satisfied. Slowly, it raised a hand, gesturing for Ethan to come closer. Ethan's body resisted, trembling, but his legs betrayed him, dragging him step by step toward the mirror. His reflection leaned in, its mouth moving soundlessly, before finally whispering aloud, "If you want to leave, trade places with me." Ethan stood before the mirror, every muscle in his body trembling with resistance. Yet his legs dragged him closer, as if the house itself controlled his movements. His reflection smiled wider, its eyes gleaming with something alien, something older than the walls around him. The voice, a low whisper, slithered into his ear. "Trade places with me, and you can leave." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Could he trust it? Or was this another trick to swallow him whole? His hand rose without permission, palm pressing against the cold surface of the glass. But the reflection's hand didn't match his. It reached through, fingers, cold and skeletal, burst from the mirror, curling around Ethan's wrist with impossible strength. He cried out, trying to pull away, but the grip was relentless, yanking him forward. His shoulder slammed against the glass, but instead of shattering, it rippled like water. He could feel himself slipping through, the mirror swallowing him inch by inch. Panic roared in his chest. He screamed, clawing at the fireplace for something to hold on to. But the shadows of the house twisted into long, dark arms wrapping around his legs, pushing him deeper into the reflection. The house itself wanted this. It had always wanted this. As Ethan's torso slipped into the glass, his head still above the surface, the world on the other side flickered into view. It was the same house, but emptier, darker, a void where time seemed frozen. Figures stood in the shadows, dozens of them, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Trapped souls, victims before him, staring with hollow rage. He realized then the truth. The reflection wasn't his twin. It was the house itself, its memory given form. The cold voice wrapped around him. Every story needs a witness. Every house needs an occupant. His strength faltered. He was being chosen, summoning every ounce of will. Ethan screamed and lashed out, punching the glass with his free hand. The mirror cracked beneath his fist, shards splitting outward with a piercing shriek. For a moment the reflection faltered, its grip loosening. The souls in the shadows hissed, their shapes trembling as though the mirror's damage threatened their existence. Ethan shoved harder, half his body still inside, half outside. The living room flickered, torn between two realities. He thought he could break free, but then the reflection leaned close, its lips brushing his ear, whispering words that froze his blood. "You already traded? You just didn't notice." Ethan gasped and looked down. The hand gripping the fireplace wasn't his anymore. It was pale, skeletal, fingers cracked and wrong. His reflection hadn't pulled him in. It had pushed itself out. He turned his head, and through the shattered mirror, he saw himself still trapped inside, the real Ethan, pounding against the glass, screaming silently, begging to be released. But no sound came through. The house had taken his voice. The reflection, his double, stood behind him now, free, smiling, and with a calmness that broke Ethan's mind. It whispered, "Thank you for remembering." The mirror slammed shut with a chilling echo, erasing the real Ethan's reflection. Outside, the false Ethan stepped through the door, wearing his face and voice, smiling as he tasted freedom. The real Ethan, trapped forever in the glass, screamed among countless souls already imprisoned there. The house fell silent once more, waiting, hungry, because it never forgets.